was talking about. I can't really describe it, but it was pretty cool. But I could. I had more time.
Well, and so that was my goal.
Testing. Okay, please come in and take a seat. Visitation time has ended. Come in and take a seat. Please come in and take a seat. Party time is over. Come in and have a seat. Bring your coffee, bring your donuts. Stop visiting and sit down. Giraldi and I have a couple of little announcements before we start, and then I'll turn it back over to President Rombach Kendall for this introduction. We've got a couple little housekeeping things. Please come in and sit down. Visitation's over. We do not allow people to stand in the back of the room and visit. You must come up here and take a seat right away. Some of you look challenged about finding a chair to sit in. It's not that hard. Wow. This is a slow group. All it's all I can say, come in and sit down. There you go.
The last person to sit down has to collect 12 junior high grants today.
Okay, here it is. May I have your attention for a moment? A couple of housekeeping announcements, some from me, some from Kevin Giraldi. My name's John Block. I'm one of your hosts, along with Kevin Giraldi here from UNCG. A couple of announcements. Let's review about buses to the concerts, since some of you are new today. Out here where we had our reception, on that direction, right out on the that entrance, the biggest entrance really to the hotel, the buses will line up at 1:30 today to transport you to the 2:30 concert. They'll be running continuously, starting at 1:30. About the last time you can get on the bus, and make sure you get there for the downbeat at 2:30, would be about 2:10. So don't wait till the last minute. Get a bus. You can go over there if you have a little extra time. You can get a cup of coffee across the street or one of those places on Tate Street, or have a little extra time. At intermission, between the two concerts, we'll have receptions for you on 2 levels in the auditorium, on the main lobby and then the lower lobby, which is where you really want to go, because there you can explore our giant bathrooms. Featured in our video. Okay? So those are the buses to get you to the concert. I'm going to talk just a little bit about lunch today. You have many options. The hotel down the hall this way, Joseph's Restaurant, is quite nice. If you want a little fresh air and exercise, about a 3 or 4 minute walk over to the mall. Enter any door, get to the middle of the mall, go to the top floor, escalators or elevators. It's a nice food court there, and with all the usual mall food court choices, they're all actually pretty good. And if you have a car, then you can look at our restaurant guide and go wherever you like. Across the street that way, Daryl's restaurant, Smoky Bones, a couple of other places. You just have to sort of dodge the traffic on High Point Road to get over there, but it's really a pretty close walk. I'm going to ask Kevin Giraldi to talk a little bit about this evening when we come back from the concerts, the improvement we hope to see in the bar tonight.
Why are you leaving that to me? What message does that send? So we know it was very slow last night when the line was like 6 deep around the bar, so we've kind of twisted arms and we're going to have a couple more bartenders, 3 or 4 more bartenders. Because it was ridiculous when there are servers going around in the room with all the tables and chairs to go in and ask the one bartender to make drinks for the people in the other room. Just glacial. So that'll be much better tonight.
And there are alternate bars.
And there are other bars, and then you can like carry it from the other bar where several of us went where there wasn't a line. So you can just find the other spaces around that part of the hotel. And again, we'll drop off at that entrance right by the bar this afternoon or this evening. And some of you, after the concert, were waiting in front of the hotel to get picked up, or in front of the auditorium to be picked up by the buses. The bus is not going to pick you up there; it's going to pick you up where it drops you off behind the art museum.
One bus dropped off.
And one bus dropped off in the wrong place, so that caused some confusion. We'll have that straightened out with the bus drivers.
All behind the art museum, across the street from you. Any questions? All right.
All right.
I can tell what's important to this group. Concerts, blank, bar, yeah, okay. Well, I'm thrilled to introduce our keynote speakers. To my left, one of my longtime friends from many years back, and we've been partners in crime on a number of projects, and really one of the most creative people that I know, Sam Pilafian. And then Sam corrupted his dean, Shelley Berg, to the dark side over here to talk as well. But I've asked them to talk about change, what they see as change in the music profession, what the implications of that may be for us as college band directors and as music educators. So rather than stealing more of their time, please welcome Shelley Berg and Sam Pilafian.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, and thank you, Eric Rombach-Kendall. And to be here at CBDNA, I've been in many different capacities as a writer and as a performer and as a lecturer before, but this is the most important moment for me. And I'll tell you why. In order to talk about the future, I need to go back in my past, because I'm now at the University of Miami, and I'm on the same territory where I was with Frederick Fennell 45 years ago. It's very easy to remember when walking around the same hallways and being in the same halls, and being out in the parking lot where that beautiful 1963 ragtop Corvette, candy apple red, used to be parked by his band room. It's to remember the things that happened with Dr. Fennell and how he shaped my life. So I want you to understand that. And like a letter of recommendation, I need to give you the reason why they asked a tuba player to come here and talk to you.
I was wondering that myself.
Yes. My history with Frederick Fennell goes all the way back to the junior year in high school. He took over the Miami Youth Symphony. I was the president of the Miami Youth Symphony at the time, and he had a dilemma. He called me in his office before the rehearsal on a Saturday morning, and he said, I'm having my first experience with band parents, except they're orchestra parents. And they want to rotate all the chairs every piece, and we'll be back at square one every time. So your job as president is to make sure that they don't play volleyball, that they play baseball, and that the manager gives the batting order at the beginning of every semester from now on. And I said, and I turned sheet white, because I was afraid to go out and talk to the orchestra about this. And he said, it's really simple. If we want to get better, we'll have to get it right. So I just went out and gave him the volleyball speech just like he told me to do, and it worked. We were able to set the chairs and keep everybody in one place so he can improve the group. And because I pulled that off for him, I got this incredible experience at Interlochen. I won the concerto contest. It was the second time it had ever happened. And I was headed for Juilliard and on to the orchestra world, or whatever I was dreaming at the time. And one day Frederick Fennell came up to me after rehearsal and he said, I need for you to help me rake the leaves away from my A-frame house near the Interlochen grounds. And if you do, I'll give you a big spaghetti dinner. So I was in. And we were doing this raking, and he started talking to me, and there's things that happen that change your life. And raking the leaves that day changed my life, because he said, if you don't go to Juilliard and you come study at our school, I'm going to be your advisor, and I'm going to turn you into a liberal artist. And it's something I've always wanted to do. I'm sure it's the way that you should be educated, but I do believe that we have enough faculty members here for me to design something for you. The only thing you have to do is everything I tell you. But he described a liberal artist as somebody that was educated in such a way that you could recombine the ideas imparted to you during your undergrad and go forth, so that if history doesn't repeat itself and new technology or new ideas come, you could recombine what you've been taught as a liberal artist and not only survive but possibly thrive in the future. So I said yes. I didn't even know what he was talking about, but he was on Mount Rushmore already at that point, you know, for conductors for me. And whenever he conducted at Interlochen, it was one of the great high points of that summer. Always. So I said yes. I went to University of Miami, and what happened there was my theory teacher was Jerry Coker, the guy who wrote Improvising Jazz. And for the rest of college, after the first year, was Alfred Reed. He also put me in Alfred Reed's music business class. I also studied modal counterpoint with Clifton Williams, which is the hardest class I ever took in my life. He was unrelenting. I also was in the conducting class of Frederick Fennell, but he made me vow that I would never conduct. Talk about a self-deprecating statement. He wanted me to hear like a conductor, and like he said, you just got to do everything I tell you. He said, this is not about conducting, it's about score study and the ability to hear. And then he turned around to me and he said, you'll only go as far as your ear develops in music. That's all you'll do. That's the one thing that this whole building has in common, is that it's about our ear. So you'll only go as far as that. So I'm going to put you in a fast track and you're going to try to hang on. So at the same time, I started improvisation with Jerry Coker as a class, as a freshman, and I looked around and everybody else was bald and was just getting back from the Army, you know, and the jazz majors. They were all adults at that point during the Vietnam War. So their love of education, because they were more grown up than I was, really rubbed off on me. And they took very carefully all the notes, and I stopped being a high school student in a couple of months. And then there was this amazing day when he came up to me and he said, okay, is college spinning okay for you? You got all your classes going and you're practicing, and it's a 24-hour practice room situation. I want you to know that. So that if you feel like practicing, you just swipe your card. That's how it works. So we got going and he said, okay, good, because you're going to be the contractor for my new project. He had always dreamed about a pops orchestra in which there were winds and pairs, a bare bones brass section, and two great percussionists that could make this music work, from classical through Arthur Fiedler's formula of what a pops was. And he had a patron, so the North Miami Beach Pops was born, and they right away started selling out this wonderful auditorium up on the north side of Miami Beach. But I was the contractor, and I hadn't turned 18 years old yet. So when I made the phone calls, a violinist told me, I played in the first violin section for Toscanini from the beginning of the NBC Symphony until he died. And I'm not playing second violin for Fred Fennell. I'm not going to do that. So I brought him back the news about the violinist, and he wrote down on a 3x5 card while he was talking to other people about assignments and things like that. And he handed me the card and he says, look at this card and call the guy back. And he said, and so I read the card and I called the guy and I said, the reason we need for you to play second violin is because of the weakness of the violins. And we need a true leader. Somebody with Toscanini experience to lead them so that we have a balanced orchestra in a very unbalanced situation. And the guy said yes. So I went back to Dr. Fennell, and I'm telling you something, I listened to every word he said to me after that, because that to me looked like an impossible mountain to climb. And in one 3x5 card multitasking moment, he took care of this person. So I contracted his orchestra, and we had adventures. There were people whose planes were late and we had no soloist, and he turned around and redid the book, you know, reshuffled the thing until the plane landed, and I watched him put out fires musically on the spot. And clearly his experience in the recording studio turned him into an incredibly fast thinker. To see him in a live situation was an inspiration, but to see him in a recording studio doing full takes and doing his greatest performing with nobody else in the room was also a great inspiration of fast thinking and getting things done. It wasn't a matter of stripping small takes together. It was full takes and going back and getting a few spots afterwards. And then he would critique the group about how long it took them to get that, and how the next time we did a recording session would try for half that time. And by the end of my freshman year, he had a recording ensemble out of the group. It was microphones that did that. When he felt that people weren't concentrating enough, he would roll out these two gigantic microphones on an old school microphone stand that was on wheels with gigantic English microphone cables, which were like ropes. And talk about forbidding looking objects. He would put it right behind the conductor's podium, and the wires would go back into the library where the tape recorder was. And he said, we're gonna record the rehearsals from now on, and I'm gonna study that, and then I'll see you at the next rehearsal, and I'll give you the notes of what I learned. As soon as those microphones went up, the concentration went through the roof. So after I graduated, about 5 years, and I'm from Miami, so I would visit a lot, he told me that those wires never were connected to anything. So you're starting to get the picture of what it was like to be an undergrad with Frederick Fennell, who conducted the orchestra and the wind ensemble. He was also the head of instrumental music, and he expected a lot of us. But it went further than that for me. My father was his attorney since I was in high school until he passed away, and they were born the same year. My father's last case, he tried at 87 years old, and passed away after Dr. Fennell. But because he was my father's client, he was at our dinner table a lot of the time. It was only 5-6 minutes away from the university. So my father used to like to improvise cook Armenian food and put it down on the table, and Frederick Fennell would love to eat. And so they would sit there and talk. So this class, today class, is about the future. But you need to know that my father was a radioman in the United States Navy. He worked at the Pentagon. He worked on things like the Norden bomb site and radar and things like that before the Second World War and during the Second World War. So when Frederick Fennell asked him how a decatree works, the 3-microphone system, the two of them would sit there with legal pads and draw schematics. The two of them would do that. And I was watching him. I thought all he did was music, because that's all I did. And I thought that when we got really dedicated to that sort of thing, that we immersed ourselves 100%. To see him talk about electronics with my father was a real inspiration. He was immersed 100% in everything he did. And he would walk away understanding how they were wired and how it would work, and he would want to know the minutiae and the general effect of the same technology. And he stayed that way the entire time I knew him. When the Norelco cassette player came out, it would look like a cigar box. It would record and it would play back, and the fidelity wasn't very good. He excitedly came up to me after rehearsal one day and he says, "Meet me out of my car." Now, I never did get in his car. And part of it was because he was crazy when he drove. But I didn't feel worthy of sitting in a car with real leather seats. I just thought that would be wrong. But that's not why he wanted to go out to the car. He put the Norelco of today's rehearsal. He had a cassette in there. He recorded some of today's rehearsal, and he played it back, and it didn't sound very good at all. And then he took it and he put it on the dashboard of the car, and the whole windshield became an amphitheater for this a band shell for this sound, and it sounded 3-4 times better than that one thing. And he said, "This is the future." He said, "They're going to get this to where it's like Dick Tracy's watch. You'll be able to listen to music like this." And he started describing things that are happening today. He did it over and over again. My love of sailing when I was a kid got me to join the City Sailing Club for children, and we used to sail 6- and 8-foot prams around Biscayne Bay. And we would take sailing school, and if you fell out, it was okay, because you had on so many pieces of life preservers that you looked like a donut out there, if you fell out. But I learned how to sail, and it paid off because Frederick Fennell bought a 32-foot Dutch sloop called the Ching Foon. And he would go 6:30 every Saturday morning that he was in Miami, and we would go sailing, and I was his crew. So that love of sailing paid off because I would get his boat ready, we would go out, we'd get out on the water and start talking about music. And that education is one of those things that we all experience when we're at conventions like this, and this huge, great trust of people does the unofficial part of things. And I'm sure that's why it was so important about the bar, because we're going to learn so much tonight. Being on that boat was amazing. I had started to work in Miami, which had quite a nightlife, and there was money. I was making money. I could afford really good headphones, and then I could afford really good speakers. And I started becoming a gig monster. The first time I ever heard the word gig was from Frederick Fennell. He says, "This is not about gigs," one day, as it was calm out on Biscayne Bay and there was time to talk. He said, "If you concentrate on the art, the money will show up. Don't worry about the money, worry about the art." He says, "It's everything that you can't do that you should be practicing, and everything that you can't hear that you should be working on." So those were those moments where luckily you could stare out into the ocean, when you were so embarrassed that you had tripped upon something that upset him. because you didn't have to get stared down by him. That was not a cool thing when he got irritated. So it was, like he said, do everything I say. The education was that way. It was very important to him about his friendship with the people at Mercury Records and the incredible technology that made those great Eastman Wind Ensemble recordings. He talked about the wonderment of the cough, the head with two microphones where the ears go, and putting it out in different parts of the Eastman theater to find out where this sound would be the absolute best. So his chase of the absolute sound caused him to love technology. And you know, I put it together later, that whole idea of how electronics work was a really big thing for him. And it was always, you need to know, it was always about capturing performances. He wanted to capture performance. It wasn't about recording sessions. And I heard him one day tell me about why. He said one night before an Eastman Wind Ensemble recording, he was laying in bed and he started to go and do the math. How many keys are there on a clarinet? How many clarinets do I have? How many pads are on a clarinet? How many pads are on a flute? How many things could go wrong tomorrow morning when we go in the recording session? And he didn't sleep all night long. And he said he walked in there waiting for a bomb to go off. And as soon as he dropped the downbeat, it became about the music and he was okay. But keeping that detailed about music the way he did, and to be able to pull himself out into the 13th row center and have the audience experience at the same time was one of his great gifts. Another thing that he told me out on the ocean one time that I never knew about was that he won one of the world's great conducting prizes, but he won it in 1939. The war broke out, and he was not able to claim the prize, which was to go to study at the Mozarteum and to actually professionally conduct a couple of ensembles. And because he didn't do that, we're here today. I do believe that as an organization. That and the fact that he got hepatitis and he sat. He had to sit and recover. It's not like it is today. And while he was recovering, he designed this idea because of his friends. Sidney Mears, the cornet player, would come home and stay in the dorm at Eastman when they were freshmen together and say, there's 9 first cornet players in the band. What would it be like if it was lean and mean? And then he said to me, I think that when I was laying there wondering if I was ever going to eat normal food again when I had hepatitis, I started thinking about music that had more protein and less carbohydrates in it. I was like, yeah, this was worth the whole sailing trip today to hear that. Every time we went out on that boat, things like that happened. And I'm here, I've known many things about him for a long time and never knew when it was going to be time to impart this. And then Eric asked me to speak to you today about the future. Here's a man who looked toward the future and dreamed, never lost his ability to dream, dreamed forward. I graduated. By the time I graduated, I was the bass player in the wonderful concert jazz band at the university, and I played tuba for him the whole time I was there in the large ensembles. He introduced me to brass quintet, which became a huge part of my career because a record came out of the New York Brass Quintet. He was great friends with Alec Wilder and Harvey Phillips, and Alec Wilder's music was on this recording, and he said to me, go take this to the library and listen to it, and tell me what you think. Fallout. So in that time of sitting there listening to that brass quintet, it all came together for me. And he knew it would, because he had me studying the jazz bass at the same time I was taking tuba lessons. And I sat there remembering, what would it be like to play tuba in something that was the nucleus of the music? And I told him that. I said, I think I heard the place where the tuba's in the middle of the action, where you're 20% of the group, where what you do, you have all the responsibilities of the rhythm section in a classical music group. And he said, okay, you got it. Now you're going to have to go out and you're going to have to use all this information and so that you can play small music and get this education. He said, but I got to tell you, people that make small group music have more opinion. They're better at intonation, they're better at group rhythm, and they listen and can accompany, which is an incredible art form. And if they do all those things and come into my large ensemble, I'm going to be a much more happy leader. And so he said, it's not just what would make you the most happy as a musician, but it's what the movement needs. You need your lessons, you need your small music, and you need your large music to feed it. So these things kept coming out of his mouth for 4 years for me. It was an invaluable time for me. And that's what started this passion for music. I graduated because I'm from Miami. I visited a lot, and I'll give you a few vignettes of what happened after my exit with Frederick Fennell. Right away, almost, the Empire Brass was formed at Tanglewood, and we came back to Miami and gave a recital. After that recital, we went sailing with Dr. Fennell out on his boat, and he talked to the group. It was a coaching about what he heard and how we needed to do certain things, like tune, listen more to the bottom for the intonation, and make sure that we gave it up, that with this many good players and this many egos, the management system should still not break down. So he understood that the first violinist or the first trumpet player had a great role, but it's whoever has the melody needs to be accompanied. There was a conversation that went 3 hours out on the bay, and when we got back, instead of going to dinner like we said we were going to do, we went to the hall, to the band hall at the University of Miami, and had this huge coaching with him. And he wanted to do one tune. He took Contrapunctus 9 from The Art of the Fugue, and he played it, and he says, when you're young, it feels great to have a certain tempo under your fingers and to be breathing a piece of music, and you're playing by feel. But he sat there and he broke this piece down from our tempo, bum, bee, ba, 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 to bum, bee, ba, 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 and he conducted the group through the entire piece at that tempo. It was never the same, ever, because you know his work and you know how he could teach line. And when the whole thing was over, there was a stunned silence when he cut off the last chord, and he looked at everybody and he said, live for the line. And that became the motto of the Empire Brass for the next 21 years, until I left. So this is one of those people that change your life. Then I met Roger Bobo in the Los Angeles Philharmonic on tour. We stayed up all night talking about Dr. Fennell. He was in one of the greatest versions of the Eastman Wind Ensemble and some of the greatest recordings of all. And the first thing he said to me was, we owe Dr. Fennell a great deal. He said, and he described his relationship with Dr. Fennell, it was the same one minus the sailboat, because it was up at Eastman. But they spent an inordinate amount of time together talking about music. And when he used to call people like us players, he says, you're really a player. You need to learn the score. You're really a player. You need to hear everything that's going by, because you can make a difference later on. And then I'll flash forward in the middle 1980s, early 1980s. I was on tour in Japan, a great deal in the 1980s. 28 months Empire Brass spent in Japan during the 80s. And Dr. Fennell was there with Skosai Wind Orchestra. And we used to see each other. He had this incredible apartment with a score study room that was completely black lacquer and tatami mats. And he could light the scores and keep the rest of the room dark. And he was sitting there for hours editing or studying. But one night he called and he said, meet me by your hotel. There's a sushi shop right on the corner of your hotel. And we're going to have an extraordinary dinner. So I went in there to have dinner. And we were at the corner of the sushi bar. I sat next to Dr. Fennell, and he had people in front of him. And he said, I'd like for you all to introduce yourselves. And he spoke fluent English. And at that dinner was the man from Sony headquarters is right above that restaurant. I didn't know that. This is the man who invented the Trinitron television. This is the man that invented the Jumbotron television. This is the man who invented the Walkman. And this is the CEO of the corporation. So it's like, so we sat there and they ate. I could hardly eat. But the conversation was about where it's going. And it's the first time I ever heard what we now call disruptive technology. It was the first time when he said, like, this is where music listening is going to go. It'll become a personal thing. And they asked him, what does that mean to you as a live music person? And he said, I'm both. I'm both. And if you are a person who is drawn to sonics and the greater ability to hear fidelity, then you're going to go to live concerts to make your A-B discussions. And they immediately took that seriously. And they hired Akayama the brother of the famous orchestra conductor, to conduct the Sony concert band. And Alfred Reed started coming over and doing those incredible trips to Japan, in which he did a lot with the Sony concert band. So as a company with no music majors involved, they made better live music because of that discussion that night. It was, I can't tell you how many times I watched that happen in my life, and how his bent toward the future got everybody going in that direction. So everything that he predicted, except for the time frame, came true. So the idea of being a liberal artist and the idea of being able to recombine to move with the changes that will come in the arts will cause you to be part of the forward motion of the arts. But he was saying that by the 1990s, these things would happen, and actually they're happening more right now. So it took a little bit longer for that to happen. But his dedication towards looking at the future while being such a great expert at history at the same time was incredible. And so for me, as a member of Empire Brass, we had him come conduct a post-Civil War recording of brass band music that was found. He also talked to John Newsom. They were going to discard pre-Civil War music that had the music of Stephen Foster inside these little American brass band journals. They were to be thrown out in 1 week. And so he called Dr. Fennell. Dr. Fennell had me fly down from the Boston Pops to go to Washington and rescue this box of music. And he edited for us what became a major Columbia recording. So he never stopped with the tradition. And at the same time, and you talk about coincidences, my cousin Bob, who plays viola in the Florida Gulf Coast Symphony, is also a letter carrier for the United States Postal Service. His route was Siesta Key. He was the mailman for Frederick Fennell until he passed away. So he used to get me messages. He would call me at night. Cousin Bob would call me at night and said, Dr. Fennell's, and he was a viola student of Dr. Fennell's at University of Maryland. He would call at night and he would say, Dr. Fennell says that you have to hear Terry Riley and C. It's called minimal music. You need to hear it. Go get it. It's on Columbia Records. So I would get these things. I would get these listening assignments from the mailman. And that's on the other side of Florida. Talk about a coincidence. So this went all the way, and literally all the way to the end, because Bob, as his mailman, knew something was very bad with his health because he was delivering the mail and there were cars everywhere. He knew that things weren't going well, and I would get a phone call from him every day for the last 3 weeks. Talk about people that change your life. He took extra time with me and got me to where I could speak to you today about these simple little axioms that are so incredibly important. And that brings us till now. So I asked Shelley Berg to come with me to do this talk because his charge as Dean of the School of Music is to survey the future constantly. He's like a CEO. He needs to know where it's going so he can make the best investments of time. The best person I know right now in our history as educators would be Shelley to talk to you. I was so worried that it might be a political thing to do that I asked the CBDNA board to check it out, that it's okay that two Miami people were talking to you at the same time. But I feel it's very important that you know about his discussions with thought leaders and how he feels that we've gotten to where we are now and what's forward of here. And after that, we're going to open it up, and hopefully the second part of this will be interactive. The final part of this will be interactive with you. Shelley Berg, my dean.
So what I've learned in the last few minutes is that I need to find a student to be my slave. That's a great deal. Come rake my leaves. I like that. So, stand on the floor. It's interesting because if you think about the things that Frederick Fennell was doing 40 years ago, how many schools are doing those things today? How much have we accomplished in 40 years towards the groundbreaking things he was doing to help nurture musicians like this? I think you know what the answer is. If anything, we've moved backwards in most places. We have not moved forward. I used to do a lot of lectures for high school and junior high band teachers who wanted to get over their fear and learn something about improvisation. So there I'd be in a room this size with high school teachers, and I would usually start my lecture like this. When was the last time you were driving down the road, listening to classical music station, sounded great, you're really enjoying it, and then you almost had to pull off the road because of the beauty of that German modulation. And then everybody starts laughing because none of them have a clue what a German modulation sounds like. They remember it was something they learned in college. But to actually know what music is from listening to it was not something that they were able to do, most of them, as high school band directors. So that's a scary thought to me. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about how we got to that place. And I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about what we need, in my opinion, to be doing right now, and what we're doing at the Frost School right now. So I think there are two factors contributing to what is, and by the way, you guys, you folks are the people who get it. This is the group I would most like to talk to. I mean that from the very, very core of my existence. But we've gotten to a scary place about the mentality of music making. And so, first of all, in our infinite wisdom, we created a system of teaching people other skills besides how to play their instrument, based on a methodology that is guaranteed to make people think they have no aptitude for anything but playing their instrument. And so if you set people up to fail, they will step away from that and do something else. So how do we do that? Well, we decided that theater training should be based around the Bach chorale. Now that's very convenient because you can have the entire gamut of tonal music in about 8 bars. Oh, chord, 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 chord. We got secondary dominance, we got dominant preparation, we got the whole thing. It's very easy and convenient for us. The problem is, there's no other music like that. Number one. Think about it. 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 5 5 5 5 5 5 5 5 5 5 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 5 1. That's what music does. Okay? But instead, we stick this thing in front of them that there's a chord every beat, and then we say, okay, now we're going to teach you to hear harmony. Chord, 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 chord. Write that down, please. And the student says, I can't hear that. I must not have an aptitude for hearing. Then we say, now compose like that. Go ahead, write a great melody. There's a different chord every beat. Well, I guess I can't compose either. Especially since I can't hear what I'm writing. Haydn composed by improvising until he came up with a theme. So did Beethoven. So did Mozart. So did Bach. Creators of music. We created a system that said to our aspiring musicians, you really can't do this. When that was never the truth. It was never the truth. But we made it the truth over 100 years. Then on top of that, we had something called the recording. The recordings then made it possible for everything to be perfect. So then, live performance had to be perfect to emulate the recording. Well, then, there's no time to try to be anything else but the perfect musician, and so you're not going to spend your time in all those other creative pursuits that might add something else. And so along the way, I don't know that the Chicago Symphony and the Philadelphia Symphony sound any different from each other anymore like they used to. Or the one violinist sounds any different from another, or one pianist sounds any different from another. I liked going to hear Horowitz and then Rubinstein in the same week one time, which I did when I was younger, because there were two very different pianists. Now we have an ideal of what things are supposed to sound like, and so why even go to hear a concert when you already know what it's going to sound like? So here we are. I believe that we're in a place where there's a very negative mentality in symphony orchestras. Circle the wagons. I have a colleague that left a very, very major symphony. I have a couple of them. But one of them was in his 20s when he did. And he said, the mentality of that organization was, we want to make sure the audience knows how miserable we are. Yeah, we get a good laugh out of it. But we blame the audience. It's not their fault. If they don't love the music, then either we don't love it enough, we don't understand it enough, or we don't convey that love of it to them well enough. But in the symphony world, it's all about services. Oh, you want me to put that, or you want to put our music on YouTube so that somebody might actually be interested in coming to hear us? Well, that's a service, and it's a really expensive one because it's multimedia. And our union says you're going to have to pay about $150,000 if you want to put that little clip of our orchestra up on YouTube. The mentality is, if I'm not getting paid for it, then I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to go out in the community and work with kids. I'm not going to go out and play for people in a chamber music group to perhaps entice another audience to come and hear our concerts. They lay all the responsibility on the donors and the ticket buyers. They give them a boring product and then say, continue to sustain this for us. Well, it's not going to sustain. The Musicians Union is going to go out of business. Most of the symphonies as we know them are going to go out of business. And guess what? That'll be the best news we ever had, because out of that is the future. The future is always brighter than the past. And the future for music, I wouldn't be a dean of a music school if I didn't think the future of music was the brightest it's ever been. There is more music all the time. But we have to stop training people for the head of a pin. We have to. That's not going to be there. So, I didn't study with Dr. Fennell. I didn't know what he did 40 years ago at the University of Miami. So I'm feeling a little less proud of myself to be copying him 40 years later thinking I had a new idea. Thank you very much. So what we're doing is something called the Experiential Music Curriculum. We've taken our freshmen and sophomores out of some of the lecture demonstrations. I mean, you know why people don't have ears when they come out of music school. You know. It's not only the system, and by the way, it's not that way for everybody. People who want to get it. A great teacher can always trump a bad system. So if you're fortunate to have a Frederick Fennell in your life, you're probably good to go. But, music students take 11 courses a semester. Their peers around the university take 4. And so I got to practice for my lesson. It's pretty obvious if I didn't. I have to do my theory homework and turn it in. I have to study for that music history exam. I have to write that English paper. Oh, ear training class. Maybe I won't get called on to sing my 8 bars. Sound familiar?
For 1 credit.
For 1 credit. Thank you, Lansing. So you hang out in the back of the room, hoping not to get called on. If you do, well, I'll make it through this 8 bars somehow, and I know the teacher will pass me, and maybe it'll be 2 weeks before I get called on to do that again. So we've taken our students out of those lecture demonstrations as not being a good place to learn how to do things. It's a good place to learn about things, but not how to do things. And so we have all of our freshmen and sophomores, and by the way, all of our performance majors do this for 4 years. We have them in what we call skills ensembles. 6 to 8 people at the most, meeting a couple hours a day, twice a week. And in the skills ensembles, they are composing, analyzing music that they play, but most of the music they play is not written down. They have to listen to things and then replicate them in a small group setting. And then analyze what it is, what the form is, what the harmony is, who's got the melody, what's the bass line. So it's an entirely immersive exercise in hearing, composing, analyzing music by doing. As a jazz musician, that's sort of how I did it. I learned how to do those things in a small group. And it's astounding what's happening with that curriculum, because our students are becoming much more aware of the music around them. They know what their role is. They know when they have the 7th of a dominant chord in the middle of an ensemble and what that means. Their sense of investment in their own music making goes up by a pretty severe exponent. And by the way, there's something you should know about how we do it. We have master teachers, and then like the freshman class, the classical component of the freshman class breaks up into 10 skills ensembles or 12 skills ensembles. So they get together for a 20-minute lecture and followed by the rest of the 2-hour block, breaking up into the skills ensembles. And every 20-minute lecture is by a master teacher. So every Thursday, except for today, I did it on Tuesday. At 8 a.m., I teach improv to all the classical freshmen in our school. We have somebody else work on them with sight singing, somebody else with composition analysis part. And then they break up into their small groups with faculty and TAs doing the small groups, and the master teachers are going around to all the small groups. So another benefit of that is that the TAs are actually watching master teachers, and the master teachers are watching the TAs. I had a theory TA when I studied theory. That's not always a good thing, especially when they're not supervised. So this has been going great, but by the way, in the experiential curriculum, all of our undergraduates take a year of Pro Tools. All of them. They all become Pro Tools engineers. And they all take a year of business and entrepreneurship classes in music. And for the performance majors, at the end of their 4 years, their third and fourth year of their skills ensembles, they're composing, more improvisation, conducting. At the end of their fourth year, they have to do projects that are like a thesis, except they get together and decide what it is. And their projects have to have improvisation, composition, technology, conducting, everything. And that's how they're evaluated before they leave school as a performer. As opposed to, is the only thing you can do, is that play your concerto so well that maybe you'll get a job in an orchestra that maybe you won't be there. We also brought the Henry Mancini Institute to our school. Henry Mancini Institute is a set of values laid over the top of our school. It says that while you're in school, you're going to do recording sessions, you're going to learn how to be in a recording environment, you're going to do television specials, you're going to do film scores, you're going to play very, very cutting-edge new music, you're going to play music of a variety of genres, you're going to work with master practitioners all over the music area, so that you don't think of music this way, as such a narrow thing, so that you're not a snob, and so that you have many, many more opportunities. As I said, I don't think there are going to be as many orchestras. I know there already aren't. There aren't as many players working in the Broadway pits or the Hollywood studios or in Miami Beach or in Las Vegas. But there's more music, there's more opportunity all the time. If you have a skill set that you can take some responsibility in what you do with your musical abilities. So we did a PBS special this semester and a couple of record projects for major labels with our students. They get paid. We're not stealing work. But we had Phil Ramone produce this TV special that we did with Bobby McFerrin, Chick Corea, Dave Grusin, Eric Owens from the Metropolitan Opera, Mark O'Connor, a dancer from Alvin Ailey, a concert pianist. We did a TV special called Jazz in the Philharmonic. And the students got together one day to see music all written by other students, by the way. The next day we were doing tech rehearsals, and the day after that we shot the show twice, including in front of an audience of 2,000. They basically had one day to learn 2 hours of very, very, very difficult orchestral music that required them to play like jazz players, rock players, classical players, Latin players. And it was going really well in the rehearsal, and I was so proud. And Phil Ramone stood up in front. Phil Ramone is one of the greatest producers in the history of music. Stood up in front of the orchestra and said, "You sound terrific for a concert. But this is a television special and a recording. Every note has exactly one place where it goes and exactly one pitch that it's in and exactly one groove that it's in. And if you're not doing exactly that, the recording will suck." Fred Fennell. I had a live one. It was called Phil Ramone. So, to me, the future is, it's very, very, very important to train musicians who don't hate music. When you watch an orchestra and they can't wait to get out of their seats and fly off the stage during the standing ovation, what's the message that it sends? The last faculty meeting that we had, I talked to the faculty about, next step was we need to embed performance practice into our curriculum. How to be an entertainer, how to reach your audience, how to sustain your audience, how to talk to your audience, how to show them why you love the music you're playing, whether it's John Cage or Palestrina, so that they can love it as much as you and be so glad they came. Band people do this really well, but the world at large doesn't, as you know. And I'm not just saying that because I'm talking to you. If I was talking to orchestra people, I'd say, go talk to your band director. They do this really well. So the way to train people who don't hate music is as follows. I was talking about this at breakfast this morning. My first job was as a band director at a community college in North Shore, Texas, outside of Houston. I got hired in June after my master's degree. The semester started in August. It was a new campus. They'd never had a band before. So I got the list of all the high school seniors and bands. I called the band directors and got their lists. Can you give me a list of all your seniors who just graduated? I cross-referenced that against people who were coming to our community college, and I had this really nice list of people I could call because I had no students. The school had started in 2 months. So I started calling, and by the way, our tuition was about $120 a semester. Not a semester hour, a semester. And I could offer $50 scholarships. So I started calling students, hey, I see you were in such and such band, why don't you play in the band at the community college and I'll give you a $50 scholarship. Too often the response that came back was, I'm burned out on band. What happened? Of course, we could have a whole discussion about what was going on in Texas in 1979 that might have caused that to happen, but what happens if kids go through 6 years or 7 years of a school band program and their end result is I'm burned out on playing music. Conversely, in my career as a jazz educator, which is far longer, I was the chair of jazz at USC for 16 years, I've never talked to a kid who was an improviser, who was creating music, or a composer, who said to me, I'm burned out on music. So I really believe that being a creator and not just a replicator is important. I think people in some of today's ensembles are like actors in a play, and the director says, I know the play's in Russian, I know you don't speak Russian, but I do, and I'll tell you when to be happy and when to be sad. At some point, it's just not that much fun. I did a show once. I was in the pit orchestra for the biggest singer from Hong Kong, the biggest rock singer from Hong Kong. And she's telling jokes, and the entire audience is Chinese and whatever. And they're all laughing hysterically, and the orchestra's sitting there like this. We don't know what's funny or what's not funny. We were not able to enjoy her show the same way that the audience who spoke the language could. So it's really important that we all speak the language of music so that we're invested in our music, so that we're creators of music. So when you go to a play or a movie, you want to think that person invented that dialogue right then and there, out of their brain, out of their situation. That's what I want to see in a concert. So the last thing I'm going to say, I'm producing a record with Gloria Estefan right now, and Joshua Bell did a duet with her on this record. So I wrote out what Joshua Bell played. He came into the studio, played it brilliantly, it went great. We're listening to the playback, and he looks at me and says, God, I'd give anything to be able to improvise that. Well, it wasn't rocket science what I wrote out. He should have been able to improvise that. And why do we have somebody that plays at that level, that creates at this level? Discuss.
The question is, what we as college band directors, wind ensemble directors, what can we do to prepare our students for what is the future? The people that Shelley's talked to, that I've talked to, they're creating more and more outlets for music. The inventor of Pandora Radio, the persons that make YouTube channels so high definition now. It's like we can bring any kind of music that we want to everybody, and we're not organized enough to be doing that at a high level right now. Because this also means that we can find our audience, the people who love this music, or we can make more people love this music. But because we're not thinking creatively, we haven't unleashed this on what is the new world. So we'd love to hear from you. Some of the things you might be doing or questions you might have are things that are disrupting your ability to make the future happen.
And let me say one more thing, because it comes down to something Lansing and I were talking about last night. We did a thing with the Cleveland Orchestra this year where some of our student composers wrote pieces that were performed by a side-by-side orchestra of our students in the Cleveland Orchestra. Can they put that up on YouTube? No. Cleveland Orchestra says, no, we don't want the world to see what we do. We want to live inside our closed little box and hope that enough of you still come to pay not enough money to support us. But the last thing I want to say is don't fear institutions. In a revolution, the institutions will die. and they're dying. The record industry found out that they couldn't control it. It took them 3 or 4 years after that was true for them to really understand it, and by then it was almost too late, and they've been trying to figure that out ever since. Universities are in the same place right now. We've lost control of the distribution chain. The students own it all. They're going to decide how they get their education. If they don't want to take their GEs from your school anymore, they won't. They'll take them from Coursera, and your school's going to have to fire a bunch of English and science and psychology teachers. So don't fear the institutions. If we think of ourselves as institutions, we're the powerless. The power is in the consumer. We have to focus on the consumer and how much power they have and how many of them there are. There are now billions of them to hear your band. Only if you'll allow that to happen. So when the Cleveland Orchestra says, no, you can't put us up on YouTube, there's a billion people that could be buying their product that are not going to see that. So anyway, we're open to your comments, discussion, anything.
Just like a classroom. Yes, sir.
Have you given that talk about the YouTube viability and marketability to publishers? And have gotten a response from them? The music publishers?
No, but that's a great question. Have we given that talk to music publishers? They're an institution that's under attack too. And they have to reinvent themselves just like universities do. If your university isn't reinventing itself, start yelling.
So the reinvention of that would be, with regard to publishers, is Naxos made a deal with publishers about live streaming. They cut live streaming loose from publication.
Right.
And so Naxos has cost all of us a great deal of service because people are listening for free, but they're also getting addicted. So the smart people like the Nashville Symphony have put out 15 releases, and people are listening to it for free, but their sales of CDs are up because people want to collect it. The best part is their subscription series is going. They're going the opposite way of the bigger orchestras because they went to an open source model. And so publishers, I work for a company that, as a producer, I worked for a company that was trying to get the mechanical rights, and they do it in large numbers. So they went to the publisher, they flew to the publisher to do that, and they walked in this gigantic publishing house. I'm not going to tell you which one, but there were 44 desks in the room, and only 3 desks were occupied. Everyone else was fired. And he walked in, the representative walked in and handed him a short list of tunes we wanted to clear so we could do the mechanical rights and record. And he handed the list back to him without reading them and saying, whatever you want to do is fine, just send us a letter. So it's collapsed. It's collapsed in publishing. And so what they're trying to do is survive and watch and try to predict what's going to happen next. So 44 desks down to 3. Stuart.
What you're talking about primarily is like a value shift, and I wanted to ask you, in your curriculum in Miami, how do you, even if you have everybody on board with the value shift, you still have a lot of practical things that your students have to learn. So, for instance, what do your music education majors do to acquire all of like their techniques and their methods classes? Are those incorporated into this holistic approach, or are they still just reading the curriculum? Like, how do you reconcile the more holistic, performance-oriented approach with the practical skill set that they still need to know and master?
Those courses are still there in the curriculum. They're still separate. We had to get rid of some required courses to make room. You all know we couldn't add more courses to a music curriculum. We had to get rid of some required courses to make room for some of what we do. But the majors all have their prescriptive things, which is why only freshmen and sophomores are in the experiential music classes if you're not a performance major. And the performance majors have room in their curriculum to stay with those classes in the junior and senior year. But the other thing is we created a community of musicians. When I was at USC, there wasn't much care or thought about music ed majors, music business majors, music engineering majors as members of a musician community. Well, they're here, they pay tuition so we can scholarship the orchestra. And in our school, it's a community of musicians, so when you're in a skills ensemble, there's a music ed major, a music engineering major, a music business major, and a performance major in the same ensemble. Now, it makes our audition requirements pretty high. We can't, at USC, if they could figure out where the mouthpiece went, they could get in as a music business major. But in our school, they have to audition first, and if they're good enough to play in our ensembles, they get in the school, and then they decide what they want to major. So this is a place where they all come together, but we still have the separate things that we do in all of our departments.
So musicianship is commonality, and then specialization starts before grad school. It starts to unfold as they go from a common musicianship. And it's very interesting. I have a warm-up in the early morning, and it's a published book. I never pass the book out because they're all, even the engineering majors, I realized the first day the shipment was late. And by the end of the day, they were playing this warm-up. And I was like, I never did pass it out. And it's because they have some musicianship in common that allows a whole lot to happen in that building because of that. And everybody has to play in ensembles, and all the way through college. So you don't get so special in music engineering that it becomes a world of math and sound. It becomes playing and performance practice, which makes them much better producers later on, because they can empathize. Yes, sir?
Just comment or question, but when we talk about consumers, I still prefer to think of my students as students and not consumers, that there are more than one type of relationship in society. And I think we start to link, it's a dangerous and not really desirable aspect to think of our students as consumers. I mean, I understand what you're talking about, but they're still students. But just on a very practical level, I teach oral skills, sight singing and dictation. And my students come into the class deeply resenting having taken the class. I mean, why should I have to learn how to hear, basically, is where they're coming from. And why do I have to sing if I play the drum? And so it's a real struggle to get them to understand that, I mean, I'm really glad I teach the class because my ears have gotten a lot better. So it's been great for me. But how do you deal with that? Or, I mean, I can't change my whole curriculum as you have done. It sounds great. But just on that resentment of why do I have to take this stupid class?
Well, let me say first off that I love my little commerce units. You're so right, and so that's that pervasive mentality. That pervasive mentality that somehow we're teaching to this culture that's sick. And so it's really important for studio teachers and teachers all through the music school to to have a common sense about what it means to be a music student and what it means to be a musician and how we're all holistically involved, how we're the village, that's raising this young musician. So, one of the reasons, I'm not trying to bash USC, I love them, they're great colleagues, but when a studio teacher says the only thing that matters to my student is how well they play that concerto, I don't even know why they're in a theory class. It's hard to overcome that when once a week their mentor is telling them that. We don't have that in our school. That's why I left LA. And so there's some serious discussions that have to be had because the way that they are consumers is they will choose to go somewhere else if your school doesn't have what they want, and they're more and more aware of what that is, and they're more and more in control of the ability to do that. And so that's why some really good discussions have to be had. I think, our students like the curriculum because right off the bat, they're doing what they do. They're pulling out their instruments, they're singing, they're making music, and they're learning how to do it in a more creative way. But it's really important for our colleagues to take a look at this mentality and to be part of changing that.
Yes, sir.
I am very interested because this comes down, you put your finger right on it, Shelton. We already know that none of us in a conventional template feel like we have enough classes that we can get to the students to give them everything they need. So this is going to happen. What you're doing has come at the price of some subtraction. And I want to know what it is that you either rechanneled or marginalized in the conventional curriculum to make this possible.
Well, we were able to do the ear training part just really from saying we're not going to have an ear training class anymore. We're going to have the skills ensemble. It's going to be a little longer per week, but what's more important than your ear? But then we had to make some other choices, and so we might have had to say, maybe not every student has to take every course that was required in the theory curriculum before. That if you're a composition major, that semester of 18th century counterpoint might be more important to you than it is to every student in the school. And if you're a performance major, then that extra semester of music history elective might be more important to you than it is to everyone, especially in the age of Google and online learning. We felt what we did to accomplish this was we started with a talk where we said, if there were no music curriculum, what would our values be? What would we want our students to know how to do? Because if you can't agree on the values, you can't do any of this. So, Nancy?
You also said to every department, you look where you can find some room.
Right. Where can you find some room? So we sent that back to every department, and we did it collectively. But we said, what are our values? And we decided as a school that everybody should learn to improvise, and that everybody should have technology, that everybody should have music business and entrepreneurship. That's a big decision, because most schools won't make those decisions. Then and by the way, I said, we're not going to be able to keep all these values. One of these values is going to probably be the sacrificial lamb, but we'll try as hard as we can. The value we couldn't keep was music majors shouldn't have to take so many courses in an undergraduate degree. We couldn't find a way to cut that down. I wish we could have, because wouldn't it be great if we could have more credit value for an ear training class than 1 credit? Because that tells a student how important it is too, if it's a 3-credit class. So we put the values up there, and then once the values were in place, we said, okay, these are our values. So that means that something else is no longer going to be as important. So we've got to give that away. It was amazingly easy at that point to give those things away. And so we got a composition professor shaking his head yes, saying, yeah, we were willing to do it in our department, even if it meant something that we taught everybody, we're not teaching them anymore. So, and by the way, technology is going to affect all of this. We have lots of opportunity now to lessen the burden on our students by saying, we want you to be able to do this Pro Tools thing, but what we're going to move with that is not going to be a year of classes anymore. We're going to move that to an online thing and say, if you can do this in 4 weeks, you're done. If you want to do it, at 2 o'clock in the morning, whatever, just make sure you can pass this online Pro Tools class. You're going to have this skill, and then you're going to get the units out, but you're going to have one less thing you're doing during the course of the semester. There's lots of ways to do that. I'm talking to our school about what about we have a week off for Thanksgiving starting next year, and then 7 class days or 5 class days after Thanksgiving. That's 9 days off followed by a week. So why don't we end the semester before Thanksgiving and have a class in every school that meets 6 hours a day after Thanksgiving for a week? I'd rather teach jazz improvisation 7 class periods, 6 hours a day, than 1 hour a day where after 20 minutes you finally got your horn out and tuned up and you talk about what you're going to talk about and you have 10 minutes to hear 15 people. I'd rather teach a foreign language that way. What about classes you could offer for twice as many hours a day for half a semester? So that if you have 2 of those, there's 1 fewer class in each of that half, and if you have another one at the end of the semester and another one online, your students are taking 6 classes at a time instead of 11. There's lots of things we should be doing now, but we shouldn't be thinking that the way we are doing it now is going to continue, because the students will vote for the other way. Okay.
There's sort of a super question, I think, that we're all thinking about, and many of us are. Recently I came into knowledge that it's possible under NASM guidelines to establish a unique vision or template for a school. Not a lot of people think that way, I think. It's also possible to opt out of NASM altogether, which 1 or 2 high-profile schools have. So one question is, what have you done related to NASM, or what will you do? Another question is, are there any discussions planned with NASM to get them to think in a creative way like you have?
So, number one, NASM has signed off on everything we do. When I got to the school, Sam Loeb said to me, do it. We're not as prescriptive as people think we are. We want people to move forward, and you show us how to do it, we'll sign off on what you do, and we want that, we want that to be a model. Don't be afraid of institutions. On top of that, we presented the experiential music curriculum at NASM last year at their request. They do want to hear about it, and I've been going to NASM, obviously since I became a dean, and every year there are breakouts all about the future, all about technology, all about creativity, all about getting out of the box and doing it differently. Problem is, nobody's doing it. So I was at a NASM meeting a couple of years ago, and we were grouped by certain cohorts, and so this was one sort of by size and reputation of schools. So Juilliard was there, and Indiana, and Michigan, whoever. We're all in this room, there's 70 of us or whatever, and they said, well, we've been having these breakouts for 4 or 5 years now about making it more experiential, better ear training, incorporating improvisation. Let's just share some best practices. Just raise your hand and let's share some best practices of what you're doing about it. One hand went up. It was mine. And for the next hour and a half, it was a Q&A with me. So it would be great to see more of this going on. We don't want to own what we're doing. We want to create a sea change.
Steve?
Thank you for this talk, by the way. Shelley, I'm interested in your thoughts pragmatically. If the institutions are dying, which I think would be naive to think is not happening, employment institutions, what's your goal for the typical performance major that comes through your school? How do they piece a living together? What's your idea for the typical kid?
If you didn't hear it, and I know your hearing is all very acute, if you didn't hear it, if the institutions for performance are dying, then what are we trying to train our players to do? What are they going to do when they get out? In Miami, we have a group called Seraphic Fire. It's got 2 Grammy nominations. It's now a choir and a chamber orchestra, started by a very great musician who's very entrepreneurial. And he created his own performance ensemble. And he has sold out houses in a very large concert hall and a very successful organization. There are more performing arts centers than there have ever been in the world. There are more music festivals than there have ever been in the world. There's a lot of opportunity if you're not a lemming. If you're not just, I'm reliant upon this big structure to make my work for me. Our next goal is to create sort of a Mancini Institute curriculum for our graduate performance majors, in which they take chamber music entrepreneurship as a class. We're doing a lot of that already. We're bringing in a lot of guest speakers. We're having them create their own chamber ensembles and sending them out to the community. But this is why we want people to have compositional, arranging skills, really good ears, maybe the ability to improvise, the ability to play in different styles, and to talk a lot to them about what an audience is, how you get your audience. I'm a jazz musician. Do you know what percentage of the music industry is jazz right now? I always like to joke and say, yeah, my last record did great, it went wood. I'm a 57-year-old, white, bald jazz musician. Pretty sexy. I am playing all the time, and I always have an audience. I don't think I'm the greatest musician in the world. No, I don't know. But the point is I have an audience. And in something that has about 3% of the national market, I have an audience I can play all the time. I could make my living as a jazz musician if I wasn't a dean. And so, do I believe there's something out there for people? Of course. It's just care about your audience, know how to develop an audience, know how to keep that audience, know how to develop their loyalty to you and your product, and there is a career for you. And so it's all in changing the mentality and giving people the skill set. We had a cellist from Eastman that came to get her master's degree. She was on the road with a hip-hop band last summer. She said, I could have never done that gig had I not been at the Mancini Institute. And it's not what I'm probably going to do with my whole life, but what I learned on that gig will affect what I do with my whole life. So thank you.
It's a situation that this hasn't come up yet, but online is a disruptive technology to this entire room. And the University of Wisconsin just released a study saying that the demise of higher education, as we know, will be 2020. Well, really what we owe people is an incredible live experience, and that's exactly where everybody in this room comes in. That all of a sudden, wind ensemble, contemporary music ensemble, string orchestra, all of those ensembles are the reason to come to the live institution, to the real thing. And that experience has to be beyond anything that we're providing right now, because they can get a lot off of offline, but they can't get the chemistry. It's not going to be a virtual wind ensemble. It's not going to be that. It's going to be the chemistry that happens, and that human connection is going to become the next prized thing, because it'll be so rare in people's lives. So we're going to owe it to everybody to not only have that experience, but learn how to explain to others to come have that experience with them. And that the media experience is very important to get them hooked and then get in the room and they'll never hear anything like it. As a producer, I've never heard, and I tried as hard as I could, and so did Eric Rombach, Kendall, to capture Joe Alessi's sound, to capture Phil Smith's sound, Patrick Sheridan's sound. Couldn't do it. Couldn't get the Philadelphia Orchestra, and I worked for the great producers, the people that did hi-fits and everything. They'll tell you the Philadelphia Orchestra string section never was captured. Wow. So yes, we have something that we need to champion, and we need to use the media and the social media to get people to do that, and our students are the best explainers to the future generation of why it's important to go to that concert and why it's important for us to provide an education that's beyond online.
By the way, we should teach everybody to teach. We're all here today. We're all here today because one or more great teachers inspired us to be who we become. And so I think it's really important to teach everybody to teach. I have another accident, which is never keep a musician from his or her lunch. We have enjoyed speaking with you today, and I don't want to speak for both of us when I say we're very honored that you asked us to do this. Thank you.
Yeah.